some of these are people who are barely household names in their own homes, and that it's not, beyond cleverly, it's not a sort of big reshuffle.
Hello and welcome to Coffee House Shots. I'm Lucy Dunn, and today I'm joined by Tim Shipman and Michael Gove. There's been much speculation over the last few weeks that Kemi Badenoch has been planning a reshuffle, and it seems that today's the day. Tim, what do we know so far, and are there any big surprises?
Well, the first thing that was announced was that Ed Argar, who's the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, was leaving the Shadow Cabinet. In his letter, he talks about a couple of health scares that he's had himself. I think some people, even in some of our reporting, have criticised him for not being very high profile. That may explain why he's not been sort of on the front line as much as people would have expected. So he's left the Shadow Cabinet. He's been replaced by Stuart Andrew. The big move, of course, is that James Cleverly is coming back. So former Foreign Secretary, Home Secretary, has had the period since the general election on the back benches. I think he'd had a pretty intensive time. His wife had been ill previously, and he was keen to spend some time with her. But recently he let Kemi Badenoch know that he was interested in coming back. Interestingly, a week or so ago, he made a big speech about housing to the IPPR think tank, saying Tories need to be on the side of building, which is not always the place that the Conservative Party finds itself. And interestingly, he's been appointed the Shadow Housing Secretary, which means he is the one shadowing Angela Rayner. So we can expect to see him do the odd deputy PMQs, I would have thought, though I'm told that role will continue to rotate, so it won't just be Cleverly taking on Rayner when she's at the dispatch box.
And Michael, I'm interested in your thoughts about this move from Cleverly into the front bench. I mean, just last year he was competing against Kemi Badenoch in the leadership contest. What do you think the rationale is in bringing a former rival into the Shadow Cabinet?
I think it's undoubted that James Cleverly is one of the Tories' more gifted communicators, and the word amiable is attached to his name almost, surgically, and it reflects the fact that he has a rapport with the Conservative grassroots and an easy touch on the media that I think will augment the team. As Tim has said, there were very good family reasons why he might have wanted to spend a little bit of time away from the front line, but he's also naturally someone who will want to get engaged. And it's interesting, I think, that the changes to both the housing brief and the health brief reflect the fact that I think a neutral observer would say that as far as the government are concerned, housing and health have been areas where they've been making runs. So you don't need to approve of Wes Streeting, let alone Angela Rayner, to recognise that they've been two of the higher profile and more radical ministers within the Labour government. So I think awarding the brief to James Cleverly is a perverse compliment to Angela Rayner.
I think there's probably two other little stories behind this. I think James Cleverly is looking at what he does next. It won't be surprised to people watching this that there's some speculation about the future of the leadership. And I think Cleverly has not wholly abandoned thoughts of that. Now, there are some people around him who would prefer him to run for London Mayor and think he'd be an excellent candidate for that, the kind of person who could put that Boris Johnson coalition back together in London in a way that, in a city where Labour have not been conspicuously successful over the last few years. Cleverly, I think, feels, as a former Foreign and Home Secretary, that is municipal government really where he wants to go. And I think if he does fancy another tilt at the leadership, being seen to be someone who has come back, put the shoulder to the wheel and been helpful is probably something that would be sensible. And then I just wonder if behind all of this as well, there's a little thought in Team Badenoch that having a big beast like Cleverly back to suck some of the attention away from Robert Jenrick, who is seen to be the sort of the leader presumptive if Kemi Badenoch falls under a bus. It's no harm having two potential rivals balancing each other out rather than all the attention being on Jenrick.
That makes sense. If you're the centre forward, as I suppose the leader would have to be, and you've noticed that someone has been making all the running on the right wing, then you want to balance the attack with someone on the left wing, James Cleverly, in order to make sure that you get crosses from both sides. But exactly as Tim says, the Conservative Party will never tire of speculating about who the next leader might be, no matter how well or badly the current leader happens to be doing at that time. And I think James's judgment that he will be thought better of in any future contest, whenever it might occur, for having been seen to be a team player, which I think is actually where, naturally his sentiments lie, is correct.
And Tim, I suppose there's a question here about timing as well. Some of these people have held briefs for about 9 months, not even a year so far. Why do you think Kemi has decided to go now with this reshuffle?
I think it's two things. I think it's perhaps the timing of Ed Argar deciding to step away, but also my understanding is that Cleverly only indicated relatively recently in the last few weeks that he was interested, potentially in a return. And I think that's probably brought this forward a little bit. I mean, I wrote something in the magazine 3 or 4 weeks ago that effectively said they were, the guidance then was that they would be likely to wait until after Labour does its reshuffle before doing their own. So I think this has been brought forward, and all the talk out of Downing Street is that a government reshuffle is most likely in September. So I think the Tories were originally thinking of doing this in the autumn, but I think that the opportunity to get Cleverly back on the pitch, one of the star players, as one of the people close to the leader put it to me, I think that was, they're going to have a long and tricky summer, and having a bit more weight and someone who's pretty decent on the media is useful for them to have.
And behind the scenes, one of the concerns that a number of Conservatives expressed is that after the election defeat, the internal machinery of the Conservative Party needed an overhaul. So it is significant that there's a new party chairman in Kevin Hollenrake, who again is trusted very much by Team Badenoch. And it's also the case that his appointment follows on from the appointment of Mark McInnes, Lord McInnes, who was the architect of Ruth Davidson's electoral success in Scotland, and who brings the experience of someone who knows about polling and grassroots campaigning to CCHQ. But there will be big expectations that both Lord McInnes and Kevin Hollenrake will deliver a machine when you've got elections next year in Scotland, in Wales and across England, which many people are turning into a test for the Tories. Can they see off the reform challenge? And of course, just today, Nigel Farage has been at the Royal Welsh Show unveiling his latest defector, a Tory member of the Zenith, who has joined reform. Again, not a particularly... no disrespect to her, high-profile figure, but it does show that Farage is continually seeking to ensure that those elections can be seen as a test for the Tories and a Rubicon for him.
Yeah, I suppose as Michael just mentioned, Tim, that there is this defection that's happened today, fairly high profile for reform, I suppose, in the sense that it is the party's first member of the Zenith. And across Scotland and Wales, there have been a number of Tory councillors that have defected. How great a challenge is the Welsh Party facing, the Welsh Conservative Party facing ahead of next year's elections?
Well, I think a pretty big one, to be honest. I mean, we saw David Jones, the former Secretary of State, defecting a few weeks ago. So there's a bunch of disgruntled Conservatives there who are looking at the polls and thinking, are we going to have much of a party left in Wales come next May? Most of the polls suggest at the moment that that Reform's likely to top the poll, though it may not form the government because some combination of Labour and the Nationalists may be able to stop that. But it's certainly not looking particularly fertile terrain for the Tories. And, as Michael says, Hollenrake's an interesting appointment. I think he's perceived to have worked pretty well with councils around taking on both Labour and Reform at a local level and picking holes in some of Reform's claims in the councils that they've been running. So I think he's seen as a sort of nuts and bolts thing. I think the question that some MPs will ask is he a big enough figure? Traditionally the party chairman is, someone who gets on the Today programme a lot and goes out and does a lot of media. He's not particularly renowned for that. But, as Michael says, the nuts and bolts have not been functioning particularly brilliantly over at CCHQ. And I think they need to get match fit for next spring.
And Kevin Hollenrake is not that well known outside Westminster, but the fact that he's run a successful small business, he ran an estate agency, managed to make a significant commercial success out of that, and the fact that he's an honest to God, down to earth Yorkshireman. I think that in the Tory strategists' minds, the fact that Kevin has those roots will mean that he'll be an effective counter in some of the areas where Reform want to challenge, because Reform have clearly planted their flag in what was considered to be the Red Wall, the North, and Reform are also making a play for the SME sector, the small and medium-sized enterprise entrepreneurs who have hitherto been the backbone of Conservative constituency associations.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's a blunt speaker, and he's gone off to do that. And the former chairman, Nigel Huddleston, has gone off to culture, and Huddleston's a bit more of a smoothie, and you can imagine him kind of getting in with the lovies and doing that. Perhaps that's a better arena for him. And I think most of what they've tried to do today is putting, obviously bringing Cleverly back, sorting out the health brief, which is an important one, but trying to put people, round pegs in slightly rounder holes than perhaps they were in before. But I think certainly some of the reaction from within the party and online so far has been, some of these are people who are barely household names in their own homes, and that it's not, beyond Cleverly, it's not a sort of big reshuffle, and a lot of the key figures, Mel Stride, whose job might have been in danger a few months ago. There's certainly people circulating quite keen to have it. Andrew Griffiths and Chris Philp were both quite keen to take over as Shadow Chancellor. I'm sure Robert Jenrick was as well. But Stride has had a few good weeks, actually, and shown he can put a bit of stick about. He's doing a bit more media. He's got some pithier lines, and he's kept that job. But, Chris Philp remains Shadow Home Secretary. Priti Patel remains Shadow Foreign Secretary. And Jenrick's not moving. And Laura Trott, who's one of the others who's made a pretty good impact with her work on, taking on Bridget Phillipson over schools, they're all staying where they are. And we think, there's 2 or 3 other moves which are still in the works. But, the big picture is that the big beasts stay the same, apart from the return of Cleverly.
And Mel Stride, again, the role of Shadow Chancellor is a thankless one, but he's, I think, managed to do 2 or 3 things which are quite important. He gave a speech a couple of months ago in which he repudiated Liz Truss and the mini-budget deliberately in order to emphasise that the Conservatives had learnt their lessons on fiscal responsibility. And that judgment has been, I think, reinforced by the increased coherence of the Conservative attack on both Labour and Reform for their inability to make their sums add up. And on that basis, I think that Mel has earned his place as someone who is certainly associated within the party and increasingly in the sort of business and city communities with being precisely the sort of fiscal hawk and natural, economic tough guy that you need to present as an alternative to the populism of the right and a Labour government that may be in real economic trouble this autumn.
Yeah, and we saw over, yesterday that Reform are going to have a big 6-week campaign on crime. This summer approaching is the summer of the economy for the Conservatives, and on 2 fronts. They're going to go after Labour hard over what happens in the autumn, with potential tax rises, trying to pin down Rachel Reeves on that. But they're also going to go hard after Reform, who they say their sums don't add up. And, Farage's announcement on crime yesterday, which cost £17 billion, Farage had a way of explaining where the money would come from. But I think a lot of people looked at that and thought that, it was probably a bit optimistic. Strides is, the most important job outside of the leader, and you're going to see a lot of that issue, in the weeks to come up to party conference. And
Michael, I suppose we've touched on Mel Stride and we've talked about polling a little bit as well. There's still 4 years to go until the next general election, so I suppose it's maybe slightly early to start making predictions now. But I was curious as to what you think about what we can surmise about Kemi's vision for the future and for the next couple of years from the current front bench that she's just selected.
Well, she was elected as leader on the basis that it would be a marathon, a 4-year exercise. And one indication of how seriously she's committed to that is the appointment of Neil O'Brien to the Shadow Cabinet as the minister responsible for the policy renewal programme. I've worked with Neil in the past. I'm a friend. I have to declare an interest. I mean, he's a super, super smart guy. And I think the Kemi approach is that Reform will, the closer we get to the election, have been seen, in Peter Mandelson's words, to have peaked too soon. But the challenge, as Tim and others have pointed out, is that an impatient Conservative Party may not give her that time. So that is why I think the decision to concentrate on improving the CCHQ machine in advance of next year's elections matters. That it's about safeguarding what the Conservatives currently hold, safeguarding that flank, in order to be able to have a policy offer in 2 or 3 years' time that will answer questions which the Conservatives believe the country will be asking about its future direction after Labour have exhausted and disappointed the country's hopes.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Tim. And thank you for listening.